England, spring of 1817. The nursery windows at Linfield Manor cast pale morning light across two small figures huddled together on the window seat, their golden heads bent close as they whispered secrets only twins could share. Rose Hannah Fletcher had been governess at Linfield for 6 months now, long enough to recognize fear when she saw it. Henry and Elizabeth Sutherland, just 4 years old, were already learning to make themselves small and quiet. Rose knew that children this young should not flinch at the sound of footsteps in the corridor, should not go silent the moment a particular voice echoed through the house. The voice that now drifted up from the entrance hall below was sharp and imperious. Lady Louisa Talbot had arrived for her morning visit, and Rose felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. If you believe in courage that defies impossible odds and love that transforms the darkest moments, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. Miss Fletcher, little Elizabeth whispered, her grey eyes enormous in her pale face. Is she coming here? I expect she shall visit, yes, Rose replied gently, moving into the room and kneeling before the window seat so she could meet the children's eyes at their level. But you need not worry. You have done nothing wrong. We are always doing something wrong, Henry said, and the resignation in his young voice broke something inside Rose's chest. 2 years. It had been 2 years since their mother, the Duchess Anne, had died, bringing their baby brother James into the world, a brother who had lived only hours before following his mother into death. The Duke of Linfield had been left with twins, crushing debt inherited from a father who had gambled away fortunes, and a title that demanded he secure the family's future. Enter Lady Louisa Talbot, daughter of Lord Talbot, whose banking empire stretched across England. Her dowry could save Linfield. Her connections could restore the Sutherland name to prominence. The engagement, announced 2 months ago, had been celebrated as a brilliant match. No one had thought to ask the children what they thought of their future stepmother. Rose had learned quickly enough. She had watched Louisa's mask of gracious charm slip the moment the Duke turned his back, had seen the coldness in those pale blue eyes when they rested on Henry and Elizabeth. But in the beginning, Rose had told herself she was mistaken, that grief made her see shadows where none existed. Then came the day she had found Elizabeth locked in the nursery closet, sobbing in the darkness, because she had accidentally spilled her milk at breakfast. Hunger teaches discipline, Louisa had said coolly when Rose questioned the order that the children receive no luncheon. They must learn consequences. Rose had brought food secretly after that, smuggled from the kitchens when Mrs. Downing, the head housekeeper, was occupied elsewhere. She had held Elizabeth as the little girl trembled, had dried Henry's tears when he tried so desperately to be brave. She had also begun to write down everything she witnessed, every cruelty, every punishment that went far beyond reasonable discipline. The list grew longer each week. The sound of Louisa's footsteps ascending the stairs sent both children scrambling off the window seat. They stood side by side in the center of the nursery, hands clasped, presenting the perfect picture of obedient children awaiting inspection. Rose straightened as the door opened. Lady Louisa Talbot swept into the nursery as if she already owned it, her emerald morning dress rustling with each deliberate step. At 23, she was acknowledged as a beauty, with golden hair arranged in elaborate curls and features that would have been lovely if not for the sculpted frost around her mouth. "Miss Fletcher," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that reminded Rose of her position. "I trust the children have been applying themselves to their lessons." "They are remarkably diligent students, my lady," Rose replied, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "Both Henry and Elizabeth show great promise in their reading." "How delightful." Louisa's gaze swept over the children with the warmth of someone inspecting livestock. "Though I do hope you are not being too indulgent with praise, Miss Fletcher. Children must learn humility." "They are learning many things, my lady." Something in Rose's tone must have registered, because Louisa's eyes narrowed fractionally. But she merely smiled, turning her attention to the twins. "Henry, Elizabeth, come here." They moved forward with the careful steps of those who had learned that any misstep might bring consequences. Rose's nails dug crescents into her palms. "Your father has business in the village today," Louisa informed them, crouching so her face was level with theirs. To any observer, It might have looked maternal. Rose saw the children's subtle recoil. "Which means I shall be overseeing your day. I expect perfect behavior. Do you understand?" "Yes, my lady," they chorused, voices barely above whispers. "Good." Louisa straightened, her skirts swishing. "Miss Fletcher, you may have the afternoon to yourself. I shall supervise the children personally." Every instinct Rose possessed screamed in protest, but she was a governess, the daughter of a country vicar, dependent on her salary for survival. Lady Louisa was about to become the Duchess of Linfield, wielder of power Rose could scarcely imagine. "My lady, perhaps it would be better if I remained to assist with their lessons," Rose ventured carefully. "Are you questioning my capability to manage children, Miss Fletcher?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Not at all, my lady. I merely thought." "Your thoughts are not required. You are dismissed." Rose looked at Henry and Elizabeth, seeing the plea in their eyes, the fear they were too well trained to voice. She hesitated one moment too long. "I said you are dismissed, Miss Fletcher." Louisa's voice could have frozen water. "Unless you wish to seek employment elsewhere." The threat hung in the air between them. Rose felt her face flush with helpless anger, but she curtsied and left the nursery, her heart hammering against her ribs. She descended the stairs slowly, her mind racing. She could not watch the children every moment. She could not shield them from a woman who would soon have absolute authority over their lives. Henry Sutherland was a good man, but he was also desperate to save his estate, and desperation made even good men blind. Rose found herself in the library before she had consciously decided where to go. It was empty at this hour, filled with the musty scent of old leather and the silence of 1,000 stories waiting to be read. She moved to the desk, drawn by an impulse she did not fully understand. Paper, ink, the tools of a governess familiar in her hands. She began to write. "Your Grace, forgive a servant who may be overbold. I write not from malice, but from duty to those who cannot speak for themselves. Your children go hungry, frightened, punished not for misbehavior but for the simple fact of existing. I have witnessed Lady Louisa deny them food for minor accidents, lock them in dark spaces for hours, strike them when she believes no one is watching. They are learning to fear, to hide, to believe they are burdens rather than blessings. I beg you, Your Grace, look with your own eyes when you are absent. See what I have seen. The cost of ignoring this truth may be measured in broken spirits and damaged souls. A concerned observer." Rose read the letter 3 times, her hand trembling. To send it was to risk everything. Louisa would know who had written it, would have her dismissed, possibly without references. But to remain silent while children suffered was a cowardice she could not stomach. She folded the letter carefully and moved through the corridors until she reached the Duke's study. The door was closed, the room beyond empty. Rose hesitated only a moment before sliding the folded paper under the door. What happened next was no longer in her control. Henry Alexander Sutherland, Duke of Linfield, found the letter 2 hours later when he returned from settling accounts with his steward. He had been reviewing the latest disaster in his ledgers, trying to determine which estate tenants might tolerate delayed rents, when the cream-colored paper on his study floor caught his attention. He picked it up, frowning at the lack of seal or signature. Anonymous letters were rarely harbingers of good news. Still, something made him break the fold and read. The words struck him like physical blows. Henry read the letter twice, then a third time, his jaw tightening with each pass. His first instinct was disbelief. Louisa was unfailingly gracious in his presence, attentive to his children, everything a future duchess should be. Lord Talbot vouched for her character. Lady Agatha, his aunt, praised her constantly. But doubt, once planted, sent roots deep. When had he last seen his children truly smile? When had their laughter last echoed through Linfield's halls? They had been so quiet lately, so careful, and he had told himself it was grief, the natural aftermath of losing their mother. What if he had been wrong? Henry stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The letter's author, whoever they were, risked much by writing it. Servants did not question their betters without cause, certainly not when that better was about to become the lady of the house. He thought of Anne, his late wife, who had filled these halls with warmth and joy. She would have expected him to protect their children above all else. She would never have forgiven him if he had sacrificed their well-being for financial security. Henry made his decision with the clarity that came from facing an uncomfortable truth. He would test the letters' claims. If they proved false, he would dismiss the matter. If they proved true, well, then consequences would follow regardless of the cost. He called for his valet. "Matthews, I need you to spread word that I have urgent business in London. I shall be departing within the hour and will be gone 3 days." "Your Grace?" Matthews looked puzzled. "But the Harrington dinner is tomorrow evening." "Send my regrets. This cannot wait." What Henry did not add was that he had no intention of actually leaving Linfield Manor. Instead, once his carriage had been seen departing with luggage and the appropriate fuss, he would return quietly through the servants' entrance after dark. And then he would watch. He would see the truth of his household when no one knew the master was present. The nursery closet at Linfield Manor was not large, perhaps 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide, built to store children's coats and spare linens. It had a small ventilation grate near the ceiling, but otherwise it was dark, close, smelling faintly of lavender sachets and wool. Henry Sutherland was cramped in that closet 30 hours after his supposed departure, his tall frame pressed into the confined space, and felt every inch the fool. He had returned to the manor after midnight, let in by Matthews, who understood discretion was paramount. He had made his way to the nursery wing, found the connecting door between his children's room and the adjacent schoolroom, and positioned himself where he could observe without being seen. For the first day, nothing remarkable had occurred. Rose Fletcher had taught lessons in the schoolroom, her voice patient as she guided Henry and Elizabeth through their letters. Meals had arrived on time. The children had seemed, if not precisely happy, at least safe. Then, this morning, Louisa had arrived. She had dismissed Miss Fletcher with a coldness that made Henry's jaw tighten, but he had remained hidden, waiting to see what would unfold. Now, pressed against the back wall of the closet among the coats, observing through the crack where the door stood slightly ajar, he understood why someone had risked everything to write that letter. "So you spilled your breakfast again, Henry," Louisa said, her voice carrying that particular tone of disappointed patience that managed to sound both concerned and condemning. "Clearly you are not hungry enough to be careful." "I am sorry, my lady," his son whispered, and Henry's heart clenched at the tremor in that small voice. "It was an accident." "Accidents have consequences. You will have no luncheon today. Perhaps by supper you will have learned to value what is given to you." "But my lady," Elizabeth piped up, her courage surprising Henry even as it terrified him, "he did not mean to. The cup was slippery." Louisa turned to his daughter with a smile that never reached her eyes. "How kind of you to defend your brother, Elizabeth. Since you are so concerned with his welfare, you may share his punishment. No luncheon for either of you." "That is not fair." The protest burst from Elizabeth before she could stop it. The slap, when it came, was not hard enough to truly injure, but it was sharp enough to snap Elizabeth's head to the side and bring instant tears to her eyes. Henry nearly burst from the closet, then and there, his hands already reaching for the door. But something stopped him, some instinct that told him he needed to see everything, understand the full scope of what his children had endured. Moving too soon might mean he would never know the complete truth. So he remained frozen, watching his daughter's tears fall, watching his son put a protective arm around his sister, watching Lady Louisa Talbot reveal the monster beneath the beauty. "You will learn respect," Louisa said coldly, "or you will learn consequences. Which do you prefer?" Neither child answered, knowing by now that it was a trap. Any response would be wrong. The morning proceeded with excruciating slowness. Henry watched as Louisa found fault with everything, criticizing penmanship that was remarkably good for 4-year-olds, demanding perfection in recitations, speaking to his children as if they were particularly slow servants rather than the heirs to a dukedom. When Henry knocked over his wooden blocks during a geometry lesson, Louisa's response was swift. "You are careless and clumsy," she announced. "You will sit in the closet until you can learn to be more mindful." "No!" The word burst from young Henry with surprising force. Not the closet, please, my lady. I shall be more careful, I promise, but not the dark. The closet is exactly what you need. Louisa gripped the boy's arm, her fingers tight enough to leave marks, and began dragging him toward the very closet where Henry himself stood hidden. Panic seized the Duke. He pressed himself flat against the back wall, behind the hanging coats, praying the shadows would hide him. The door swung open fully, and Louisa thrust his son inside. Young Henry stumbled, falling to his knees not 3 feet from where his father stood concealed. In the dim light filtering through the grate, Henry could see his son's face, pale and terrified, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You will remain here until I decide you have learned your lesson," Louisa said, and shut the door. The darkness swallowed all. Henry heard his son's ragged breathing, the small hiccups of a child trying desperately not to cry too loudly. Every instinct screamed at him to reveal himself, to gather his boy into his arms and end this nightmare. But Elizabeth was still out there, vulnerable to whatever Louisa might do next. Henry crouched slowly, carefully, reaching out to touch his son's shoulder in the darkness. The boy gasped, scrambling away. "Shh," Henry breathed, barely audible. "It is your papa. You are safe." "Papa?" The word was confused, disbelieving. "But you are in London." "I am here. I am right here." Henry pulled his son against his chest, feeling the small body trembling. "And I am not going to let her hurt you anymore. But I need you to be very brave for just a little longer. Can you do that?" Young Henry nodded against his father's chest, clinging with desperate strength. Outside the closet, Elizabeth's voice rose in distress. "Please, my lady, let Harry out. He cannot breathe well in small spaces, please." "He can breathe perfectly well. He simply needs to learn discipline. But he is frightened of the dark, my lady. Our papa would not wish." "Your papa," Louisa interrupted coldly, "left you in my care, which means you will obey me. Now sit down and practice your letters, or you will join your brother." Henry felt his son stiffen in his arms. He held the boy carefully, his own fury built with every heartbeat. How long had this been happening? How many times had his children been locked away, denied food, struck for imaginary offenses? How had he been so blind? Minutes crawled past. Young Henry's breathing gradually steadied, though he did not release his grip on his father's coat. Through the crack in the door, Henry could see Elizabeth sitting at the schoolroom table, her small shoulders rigid with tension as she formed letters with painstaking care. Then, after what felt like hours, but was likely only 30 minutes, he heard the nursery door open again. "Miss Fletcher," Louisa said, and Henry detected a note of displeasure in her voice. "I dismissed you for the afternoon." "I forgot my book of poetry, my lady." Rose Fletcher's voice was carefully neutral. "I beg your pardon for the intrusion." "Well, retrieve it and go." There was a pause. Henry watched through the crack as Rose moved into his line of sight, ostensibly searching for her book, but her eyes were scanning the room, and when she did not see both children, her expression tightened. "My lady, where is Henry?" "That is not your concern." "My lady, as the children's governess, their welfare is precisely my concern. Where is Henry?" The confrontation Henry had been anticipating finally arrived. He heard Louisa's sharp intake of breath, saw Rose Fletcher square her shoulders in preparation for battle. "How dare you question me?" Louisa hissed. "I am to be Duchess of Linfield. You are a servant. You will speak when spoken to, and otherwise hold your tongue." "I will not hold my tongue when children are being harmed," Rose replied, and Henry felt a surge of admiration for this woman who was willing to sacrifice her livelihood for his children's safety. "Henry is frightened of dark spaces. His mother's maid told me he was trapped in a wardrobe once as an infant and has feared enclosed darkness ever since. To lock him away is not discipline, my lady. It is cruelty." "You dare speak to me of cruelty? You who have been filling these children's heads with erroneous ideas about their importance, making them believe they need not obey their betters. I have been teaching them that they have value, my lady, that they are cherished and loved, that mistakes do not warrant punishment that breaks their spirits." "You have been undermining my authority." Louisa's voice rose to a near shout. "You are dismissed, Miss Fletcher. Pack your belongings and leave Linfield immediately. I will not leave until the Duke returns, and I can speak to him directly about what I have witnessed. Then I shall have you thrown out." Henry heard his daughter gasp. He felt his son tense against him, and he knew the moment for revelation had arrived. He set young Henry carefully on his feet. "Stay close behind me," he whispered. Then he opened the closet door and stepped out into the nursery. The three women froze in a tableau of shock. Louisa went deathly pale. Rose's eyes widened in understanding. Elizabeth scrambled from her chair with a cry of "Papa!" "Your Grace," Louisa breathed, and Henry watched her mind race, calculating, already spinning whatever explanation might salvage the situation. "What a delightful surprise. We thought you were in London." "Clearly." Henry moved to gather Elizabeth into his arms, while young Henry clung to his leg. "I find myself grateful for that misconception, Lady Louisa. It has been most illuminating." "I can explain." "Can you?" Henry's voice was soft, which made it all the more dangerous. "Can you explain why my son was locked in a dark closet for accidentally knocking over blocks? Can you explain why my children were to be denied food for the crime of spilling milk? Can you explain the fear I see in their eyes when they look at you?" "Children require discipline, Your Grace. I was merely." "You were plainly revealing your true nature, my lady." Henry set Elizabeth down carefully, crouching to speak to both his children. "Henry, Elizabeth, go with Miss Fletcher to the kitchens. Ask cook to prepare whatever you would like for luncheon. Eat as much as you wish." "Yes, Papa," they chorused, and Henry watched Rose usher them quickly from the room, her hand gentle on Elizabeth's shoulder. She met his eyes briefly as she passed, and he saw gratitude mixed with apprehension there. Then he was alone with Lady Louisa Talbot, and the mask of civility he had maintained for months finally shattered. "Your Grace, please," Louisa began, her voice taking on a pleading quality he suspected she thought would move him. "You must understand, children respond to firm guidance. Your late wife may have been too lenient, but I only sought to." "Do not," Henry interrupted, his voice like ice. "Speak of my wife. You are not fit to utter her name." Louisa's expression flickered between contrition and calculation. Henry recognized the look. She was assessing whether she could still salvage this, whether tears or anger or seduction might yet secure her position. "I love your children, Your Grace. Perhaps I have been excessively zealous in my discipline, but it comes from a place of wanting what is best for them." "You do not know the meaning of love," Henry said flatly. "Love does not lock children in dark spaces. Love does not withhold food. Love does not teach fear and self-loathing. You are being unfair. I have done nothing that any good mother would not do." "Then we have very different definitions of good motherhood." Henry moved to the door, opening it wide in clear dismissal. "Our engagement is ended, Lady Louisa. I will send formal notice to your father by this evening. You will leave Linfield immediately." "You cannot do this." The calculation vanished, replaced by fury. "Do you know what my father will do? His bank holds your notes. He can call in your debts, ruin you utterly. Then he may do so. You will lose everything, the estate, the titles, holdings, your social standing. I will not lose my children's well-being. I will not lose my honor." Henry held her gaze steadily. "And I will not bind myself for life to a woman who tortures those under her power. Now leave, my lady, before I forget entirely what courtesy demands and have you thrown out." Louisa stared at him, her beautiful face contorted with rage. "You will regret this, Your Grace. When you are penniless and your children are starving, you will remember that you threw away their future for the word of a common governess. Miss Fletcher's word had more truth in it than all your pretty speeches combined. Now go." She went, her exit marked by the slam of doors and the sharp commands to her maid to pack immediately. Henry stood in the nursery, surrounded by evidence of his children's fear. Wooden blocks still scattered where his son had knocked them over, and felt the weight of his failures pressing down upon him. He had been so focused on saving Linfield that he had nearly sacrificed the two people who mattered most. He had been so desperate for financial security that he had ignored every warning sign, every subtle indication that something was profoundly wrong. Henry sank into the chair by the window, his head in his hands. What happened now? Lord Talbot would indeed call in his debts. Society would be scandalized. Lady Agatha would be furious. The sensible thing, the practical thing, would be to beg Louisa's forgiveness, restore the engagement, sacrifice his pride and his children's happiness for the sake of economic survival. But Henry Sutherland had not spent 2 years grieving his wife to dishonor her memory by becoming the kind of man who would choose money over his children's souls. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. He would face whatever consequences followed. He knew the financial crisis was engineered by Talbot's vindictive nature, cutting off any possibility of securing new credit. He would sell land if necessary, dismiss servants, close portions of the manor. He would accept poverty before he would accept cruelty disguised as discipline. And he would ensure that Rose Fletcher, who had risked everything to protect 2 children not her own, was rewarded rather than punished for her courage. The scandal broke within 24 hours. Lord Talbot's response to the broken engagement was swift and merciless. By the following afternoon, notices appeared in all the gentlemen's clubs declaring the notes on Linfield Manor due immediately. By evening, the story had spread throughout London society that the Duke of Linfield had jilted his wealthy fiancée for a governess. The fact that this was not precisely accurate mattered little. Truth was instantly warped upon contact with gossip. Henry met with his solicitors, his steward, and his man of business in rapid succession. The numbers oppressed them. Without Lord Talbot's support, Linfield's finances were unsustainable. The estate had been operating at a loss for years, propped up by loans Henry's father had secured, and loans Henry himself had taken to pay those initial debts. "We can sell the London townhouse," his steward suggested, "and the holdings in Kent. That would satisfy perhaps half the outstanding notes." "The townhouse was my mother's," Henry replied quietly. "But yes, sell it." "What else?" "Several of the farms could be sold separately. And there are the jewels, Your Grace." Anne's jewels, the ones his mother had worn. Generations of Sutherland women, their adornments reduced to line items in a ledger. "Sell them," Henry said, and did not allow himself to feel the ache of it. While Henry grappled with financial ruin, Rose Fletcher faced her own reckoning. Lady Agatha Sutherland, the Duke's formidable aunt who had lived at Linfield since her husband's death a decade prior, summoned Rose to the morning room with all the warmth of a judge pronouncing sentence. "You have destroyed this family," Lady Agatha announced without preamble. She stood before the fireplace like an avenging angel in black bombazine, her silver hair arranged in severe braids, her expression carved from granite. "I do not know what tales you carried to my nephew, what poison you dripped in his ear, but you have ruined his one chance at saving this estate." "I told His Grace the truth, my lady," Rose replied, clasping her hands to hide their trembling. "Nothing more, nothing less. The truth. The truth is that Lady Louisa Talbot was this family's salvation. Her dowry would have restored Linfield to prosperity. Her connections would have secured the children's futures. And you, with your meddling and your presumption, have destroyed everything. Her dowry would have come at too high a cost." "Cost?" Lady Agatha's voice could have cut glass. "What do you know of cost, girl? You with your pittance of a salary and your room barely larger than a closet? Do you know what it means to watch an estate crumble? To see tenants suffer because their lord cannot maintain the land? To watch a proud family name reduced to mockery?" Rose lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "I know what it means to watch children suffer, my lady. I know what it means to see fear in the eyes of those too small to defend themselves. And I know that no amount of money is worth sacrificing their well-being." "How noble!" Lady Agatha's lip curled. "It is insufficient. And where will this nobility lead, Miss Fletcher? When the estate is sold and the children have nowhere to go, will your principles feed them? When my nephew is ruined and ridiculed, unable to provide for his own, will your sense of justice clothe them?" "I pray it will not come to that, my lady." "It will come to that and worse. Lord Talbot is a vengeful man. He will ensure that Henry never recovers from this humiliation." Lady Agatha moved closer, her dark eyes boring into Rose's. "And it will be your fault. You will have that on your conscience, Miss Fletcher. The destruction of everything these children should have inherited, all because you could not mind your place." The words struck deep because they carried a kernel of truth. Rose had indeed precipitated this crisis. Her letter, her confrontation, her refusal to remain silent had set events in motion that might indeed lead to the Duke's ruin. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Elizabeth's tears, heard Henry's terrified breathing in the closet, and she knew she would make the same choice again. "I will accept whatever consequences follow," Rose said quietly. "But I will not apologize for protecting children from cruelty, regardless of how wealthy their tormentor might be." "Then you are a fool." Lady Agatha turned away dismissively. "Pack your belongings, Miss Fletcher. You are dismissed. I will provide a character reference adequate for you to secure another post, but you will leave Linfield by week's end." Rose curtsied and left the morning room, her spine straight and her eyes burning with unshed tears. She had expected dismissal. She had known from the moment she slid that letter under the Duke's door that her time at Linfield would be limited. Still, it hurt. She had grown to love this place, these children. The thought of leaving Henry and Elizabeth to navigate the aftermath without her support felt like abandoning them in the middle of a storm. She was nearly to the servants' staircase when she heard his voice. "Miss Fletcher." Rose turned to find the Duke striding down the corridor toward her, his expression urgent. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying automatically. "I have just been informed that my aunt dismissed you." He looked tired, she thought. There were new lines around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights. "That order is rescinded." "Your Grace, I do not think." "You saved my children, Miss Fletcher." Henry stopped before her, and Rose was struck by the intensity in his grey eyes. "You risked your livelihood, possibly your ability to secure future employment, to ensure they were safe. Do you truly think I would repay that courage by casting you out? Lady Agatha believes my presence is damaging to the household. Lady Agatha does not govern this household, I do." His jaw tightened. "You will remain as governess for as long as you wish, Miss Fletcher. And if there is anything else you require, any support I can offer, you need only ask." Rose's throat constricted with emotion. "Thank you, Your Grace. That is most generous." "It is merely just." He paused, seeming to wrestle with some internal debate. "The children have been asking for you. They wish to express their gratitude for your intervention." "I should be honored to see them, Your Grace." "Then come." He led her back through the corridors to the nursery, where Henry and Elizabeth were playing with wooden horses near the fireplace. They looked up as the door opened, and their faces transformed with joy. "Miss Fletcher!" They rushed toward her, and Rose found herself enveloped in small, fierce hugs. "Thank you," Elizabeth whispered against her side. "Thank you for being brave." "Thank you for saving Harry," young Henry added, "and for always bringing us food when we were hungry." Rose blinked back tears, crouching to embrace them properly. "You never need thank me for that. It is my honor to care for you both." She looked up to find the Duke watching them, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, some acknowledgement of shared purpose and unexpected alliance. Rose had arrived at Linfield 6 months ago as merely a governess, a woman grateful to have employment. She had not expected to become enmeshed in the family's troubles, to challenge the future Duchess, to risk everything for the sake of 2 children she had no claim to. She certainly had not expected to find herself noticing how the Duke's rare smiles transformed his stern features, or how gentle his voice became when he spoke to his children. Dangerous thoughts for a governess, impossible thoughts. But as the weeks passed and the scandal raged around them, Rose discovered that many things she had thought impossible were merely improbable. And sometimes, in the crucible of crisis, improbable became inevitable. The weeks following the broken engagement were brutal. Caricatures appeared in shop windows, depicting the Duke of Linfield as a lovesick fool led about by a scheming governess. The scandal sheets had a field day, inventing lurid details about secret assignations and improper conduct. Invitations that had once flooded Linfield Manor dried up entirely. Lord Talbot made good on his threats. The London townhouse was sold at auction for far less than its value. The Kent properties went next. Henry sold his father's collection of rare books, his mother's jewels, everything that might raise funds to satisfy the debts being called in with vicious timing. Through it all, Rose watched the Duke shoulder his burdens with quiet dignity. He did not rage or despair, though she sometimes saw him standing at his study window at dawn, staring out at the estate he was fighting to save, his shoulders bowed under invisible weight. He also spent more time with his children. Breakfasts became joyful affairs in the nursery, rather than formal meals in the dining room. He read them stories before bed, took them riding through the estate lands, showed them the farms, and explained to his 4-year-olds how crops grew and animals were tended. Henry and Elizabeth bloomed under the attention. The fear that had lurked in their eyes faded. They laughed again, loudly and often. They asked endless questions and made demands and occasionally threw tantrums as healthy children did. "They are becoming themselves again," Rose observed one morning, as she and the Duke watched the twins chase each other through the garden, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. "Thanks to you," Henry replied. He stood close enough that she perceived his warmth, though they maintained proper distance. "I was so focused on saving Linfield that I nearly destroyed what mattered most." "You were trying to provide for them, Your Grace. That is admirable. I was trying to avoid difficult choices by making an easy one. There is nothing admirable in that." He turned to look at her, and Rose felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gaze. "You, Miss Fletcher, made the hard choice, the courageous one. You protected those who could not protect themselves, knowing you would pay a price for doing so. Any person of conscience would have done the same. You vastly overestimate the average person's conscience." His lips curved in a slight smile. "Or perhaps you simply do not recognize how extraordinary you are." Rose's cheeks flushed hotly. "Your Grace, Henry," he interrupted softly. "When we are private, please call me Henry." It was improper, wildly inappropriate, the kind of intimacy that could fuel even more vicious gossip. Rose knew she should refuse, should maintain the proper distance between employer and employee. Instead, she found herself saying, "Henry." His smile deepened, and Rose's heart performed an acrobatic feat that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with the warmth in his eyes. Dangerous, she reminded herself. Impossible. But oh, how tempting impossibility could be. The crisis came to a head 6 weeks after the broken engagement, when Lady Agatha engineered what she clearly believed would be the solution to all their problems. "Lord Edmund Carstairs has asked permission to call on you, Henry," she announced over breakfast one morning. The children were still in the nursery, leaving only Rose, Henry, and his aunt at the table. "Lord Carstairs?" Henry looked up from his correspondence with barely concealed irritation. "Why would Lord Carstairs wish to call on me? We are barely acquainted." "He wishes to discuss his daughter, Penelope. She is 19, reportedly quite accomplished, and her dowry is substantial. Not as large as Lady Louisa's, but certainly adequate to address your most pressing concerns." The silence that followed could have been cut with a knife. Rose kept her eyes fixed on her plate. Her appetite suddenly vanished. "I see." Henry's voice was carefully neutral. "And you have encouraged this approach?" "I have not discouraged it. Someone must think practically about this family's future." "I appreciate your concern, Aunt. However, I have no interest in courting Lord Carstairs' daughter or any other heiress at present. Henry, be reasonable. The debts are being managed, slowly perhaps, but we shall survive." "Survive is insufficient." Lady Agatha's voice snapped with elevated frustration. "You are a duke, your children are." "My children are happy for the first time in months," Henry interrupted, his tone hardening. "They are safe, they are loved. I will not jeopardize that again for the sake of social standing or financial convenience. You cannot seriously intend to remain unmarried. You need a wife, Henry. You need a mother for the twins. When and if I remarry, it will be to someone who values my children as much as I do." Henry stood, clearly ending the conversation. "I thank you for your concern, but my answer to Lord Carstairs is no." He left the breakfast room, and Rose found herself alone with Lady Agatha's furious glare. "This is your doing," the older woman hissed. "You have poisoned his mind against making a sensible match." "I have done no such thing, my lady." "Have you not? Or perhaps you harbor foolish dreams of your own. Do you think my nephew would lower himself to marry his children's governess?" The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. Rose felt the color drain from her face, even as she lifted her chin defiantly. "I harbor no such expectations, Lady Agatha. I am content in my position." "Content or calculating? I know your type, Miss Fletcher. Pretty enough to turn a man's head, clever enough to make him believe he is making his own choices while you pull the strings. But you will not trap my nephew into a disastrous marriage. I will ensure that before I allow that to happen." Rose stood, her hands trembling with suppressed emotion. She believed that remaining at Linfield to marry Henry would inflict greater permanent social damage on his children's future than her departure would. "With your permission, my lady, I have lessons to prepare." She left without waiting for dismissal, her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed until she reached the safety of her small room. There, she finally allowed herself to acknowledge the truth that Lady Agatha had so cruelly illuminated. She loved Henry Sutherland. She loved his children. She loved the family they had become in these weeks of crisis, and it was the most hopeless, impossible, foolish thing she could have allowed herself to feel. A governess did not marry a duke. It simply was not done. The difference in their stations was not merely wide, it was an unbridgeable chasm. Even if Henry somehow harbored affection for her, even if he were willing to overlook every rule of society, the consequences of such a match would be devastating. The scandal would be enormous. The remaining social standing of the Sutherland name would be obliterated. The children would grow up bearing the stigma of their father's wildly inappropriate marriage, and Rose would be viewed as exactly what Lady Agatha had accused her of being, a scheming woman who had manipulated a vulnerable man. No, better to leave. Better to take another position somewhere far from Linfield and the family she had grown to love. Better to carry her feelings in silence than to become the architect of further disaster. Rose retrieved paper and pen from her small desk. Her hand shook as she began to write. "Your Grace, I write to tender my resignation as governess to Lord Henry and Lady Elizabeth, effective 1 month hence. I have accepted a position as companion to an elderly lady in Bath, which will provide opportunity for advancement. I am grateful for the kindness you have shown me during my time at Linfield. Your children are remarkable, and I trust they will continue to flourish under your devoted care. With deepest respect, Rose Hannah Fletcher." She sealed the letter before she could reconsider, before the tears that were gathering could fall and blur the ink. Then she went in search of the Duke to deliver her notice before courage failed entirely. She found him in his study, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. He looked up as she knocked, and his expression brightened in a way that made her heart ache. "Miss Fletcher, please come in." Rose entered, the letter feeling like lead in her hand. "Your Grace, I have something I must discuss with you." "Of course." He set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "You seem distressed. Has something happened?" "I am tendering my resignation, Your Grace." Rose extended the letter, willing her hand to remain steady. "I have secured another position and will be leaving Linfield in 1 month's time." Henry stared at the letter as if it were a serpent. "Leaving? But why? Have you been unhappy here?" "Not at all, Your Grace, but it is time I sought advancement in my career." "Advancement?" He stood, moving around the desk with sudden urgency. "Miss Fletcher, Rose, if this is about salary, I can increase your wages. Or if you require better accommodations, I can arrange." "It is not about money or accommodations, Your Grace." "Then what? The children adore you. I thought you were content here." "Content is not always sufficient, Your Grace." Rose fought to keep her voice steady. "I have been offered a position as companion to a lady in Bath. The opportunity for security and advancement is too valuable to decline." It was only partially a lie. She had indeed received such an offer in a letter from an employment agency that morning. She had also immediately written accepting it, before she could talk herself out of leaving. Henry studied her face as if searching for some hidden truth. "I do not believe you," he said quietly. "I think you are running away." "Your Grace, my aunt spoke to you this morning, did she not?" His expression hardened. "What did she say? What poison did she drip in your ear to make you feel you must leave?" "Lady Agatha was quite correct in her observations, Your Grace. My continued presence here is damaging to your family. The gossip. The gossip is the price of doing what is right. I do not care what society says." "But you should care." The words burst from Rose with more force than she intended. "You should care that your children will be mocked for having a governess for a stepmother. You should care that every door in England will close to them. You should care that you will be laughed at and scorned, and your family's name will be. She stopped abruptly, horror washing over her as she realized what she had just revealed. Henry stood very still. "Stepmother," he repeated softly. "That is an interesting word choice, Miss Fletcher." Rose felt heat flood her face. "Your Grace, I did not mean to imply." "Did you not?" He moved closer, and Rose found herself unable to retreat. "Or perhaps you have been listening to the same gossip I have been ignoring. The rumors that I have developed an inappropriate attachment to my children's governess. Such rumors are ridiculous and damaging, Your Grace, which is precisely why I must leave." "What if they are not ridiculous?" Henry asked, and Rose's heart stuttered in her chest. "What if I have indeed developed feelings that are entirely inappropriate for an employer to have for his employee? What if I wake each morning grateful that you are under my roof, and lie awake at night imagining a future where you never leave? What then, Rose?" She stared at him, unable to form words. This could not be happening. He could not be saying these things. It was impossible. "You are a duke," she finally managed. "I am a governess. You cannot." "I can do whatever I choose," Henry interrupted. "I am master of Linfield, what remains of it. If I choose to throw away what little social standing I have left, that is my prerogative." "But the children love you. They call you Miss Rose with such affection in their voices. They trust you, feel safe with you. Can you truly tell me that leaving them is in their best interest?" "I am thinking of their future, Your Grace. The scandal will fade," Henry said firmly. "It always does. Society has a short memory for everything, except the most heinous offenses, and I refuse to believe that loving a good woman is among them." Rose wept, unable to stem the tears. "I am the daughter of a country vicar. I have no dowry, no connections, nothing that a duke requires in a wife. You have courage, integrity, a heart capable of loving children, not your own. You have the strength to stand against injustice, even when doing so costs you dearly." Henry reached out slowly, giving her every chance to retreat, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "You have everything I require in a wife, Rose Fletcher. Everything that matters. The world will call you mad." "The world already thinks me mad for jilting an heiress. I may as well earn the title properly." His smile held a flash of weary defiance. "I am offering you a scandal, Rose, a life dedicated to defiance of convention. I am offering you social ostracism and financial uncertainty, and a crumbling estate that may yet be lost despite my best efforts. I am offering you 2 children who have already suffered too much loss, and an aunt who will oppose you at every turn. Not a particularly appealing proposition, I admit. Then why offer it at all?" "Because I am also offering you my heart," Henry said simply. "Such as it is. Battered and rather worse for wear. But yours, if you will have it." Rose looked at him. This man who had lost so much and refused to compromise his principles even in the face of ruin. She thought of the choice before her: safety and anonymity in Bath, or risk and love at Linfield. It was not really a choice at all. "I will have it," she whispered. "Battered and worse for wear as it may be, I will have it." Henry's expression transformed, joy breaking through the careful control like sunlight through clouds. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. Relief washed over her, and she turned in his arms, clinging to him with a depth that held all her fear and newfound hope. "I promise you," he murmured against her lips, "I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret this moment." "I know," Rose replied, because somehow, impossibly, she did. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small chapel on the Linfield estate. It was not the grand affair that a duke's marriage would typically merit. There were no crowds of aristocratic guests, no elaborate breakfast, no society columns documenting every detail. Instead, there were the people who mattered: the parish vicar, who had known Rose's father, the tenants from the estate, Mrs. Downing and the household staff, a handful of Henry's true friends who cared more for his happiness than society's approval. And Henry and Elizabeth, of course, who stood at the front of the chapel in their finest clothes, beaming as Rose walked down the aisle in a simple cream gown that had belonged to Henry's mother. It was a humble choice, symbolizing the new Duchess's integrity over the ostentation of wealth. Lady Agatha had departed for Bath the day after the engagement was announced, her final words to Henry a prediction of certain doom. "You will regret this marriage, nephew. Mark my words." "Perhaps," Henry had replied calmly, "but I know I would regret not marrying her far more." The scandal, as predicted, was enormous. The caricatures grew more vicious. The scandal sheets had fresh material for weeks. Several of Henry's distant cousins wrote to express their shock and disappointment. Lord Talbot called in one final debt, forcing Henry to sell another portion of the estate. The Duke of Linfield's holdings, once vast, had been reduced to the manor house itself and the immediately surrounding farmland. But Rose discovered that she did not care, not when she woke each morning in Henry's arms, not when she heard the children's laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for too long, not when she walked through the gardens planning improvements they might afford once the last debts were satisfied. "Do you ever regret it?" Henry asked her one evening 6 months into their marriage. They sat before the fire in what had once been an intimidatingly formal drawing room and was now simply the room where the family gathered after supper. Henry and Elizabeth were building an elaborate castle from blocks nearby, their whispered negotiations punctuated by giggles. "Regret what?" Rose asked, though she knew perfectly well what he meant. "Everything. The scandal. The loss of social standing. Being married to a duke with more pride than pounds, and an estate that seems held together by hope and stubbornness." Rose set down her embroidery and took his hand. "I regret nothing. Not one moment, not one consequence. Do you?" "I regret that I imperiled you," Henry replied. "I regret that I was so blind for so long. I regret that my children suffered because I valued money over their well-being." He lifted her hand to his lips. "But I do not regret marrying you. I could never regret that." "Papa," Elizabeth called from her spot on the floor, "Miss Rose says we might plant roses in the garden come spring, may we?" "Rose can plant whatever she wishes," Henry replied, his eyes never leaving his wife's face. "She is the Duchess of Linfield. The gardens are hers to command." "Will we have enough money for roses?" young Henry asked with the peculiar clarity children possessed regarding financial matters. "I heard cook say we must watch our pennies." "We shall have enough," Rose assured him. "Roses can be grown from cuttings, which cost nothing but patience. By this time next year, the gardens will be more beautiful than ever." It was a small thing, a garden, but it represented something larger, the patient rebuilding of what had been nearly lost. Not just an estate, but a family. Not just a house, but a home. "Come here, both of you," Henry said, opening his arms. The twins scrambled into his lap, all elbows and knees and enthusiastic embraces. Rose leaned against his shoulder, and for a moment they simply existed together, a family cobbled together from broken pieces, but whole nonetheless. Later that night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Rose stood at the window of the chamber she shared with Henry, looking out over the moonlit gardens. She felt him come up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking," Rose replied, "that courage comes in many forms. The courage to write a letter that might cost you everything. The courage to believe an anonymous warning. The courage to choose love over money, honor over convenience. The courage to accept a proposal from a near-bankrupt duke who offers nothing but scandal and devotion," Henry added with a smile in his voice. "That too." Rose turned in his arms to face him. "I am thinking that we have been very brave, you and I am grateful for every choice that brought us to this moment. Even the dark ones, even the mistakes and the suffering. Even those," Rose said firmly, "because without them, we might never have learned what truly matters. We might have chosen safety over truth, comfort over courage. We might never have found each other." "We might never have found each other," Rose agreed. They stood together in the moonlight, two people who had risked everything for what was right, and found something precious in the rubble of their former lives. Outside, the estate that had been Linfield for generations spread out in diminished splendor. Inside, a family built on love and courage slept peacefully. It was not the life either of them had imagined. It was, Rose reflected as Henry's arms tightened around her, infinitely better. The years that followed were not easy. Linfield never regained its former wealth or extensive holdings. The Duke and Duchess of Linfield remained on the fringes of society, invited to fewer events than their rank would typically warrant, whispered about at gatherings they did attend. Lady Agatha, though still resident in Bath, made no public statement against the happiness of her great-nephew and great-niece. But gradually, slowly, opinions began to shift. There were those who admired Henry for choosing principle over profit. There were those who saw in Rose not a scheming governess, but a woman of genuine courage and grace. There were those who noted that the Sutherland children, far from being damaged by their parents' scandalous marriage, seemed remarkably happy and well-adjusted. 10 years after that wedding in Linfield's small chapel, Henry and Elizabeth Sutherland made their own debuts in society. They were followed by 3 more siblings, twin girls, Anne and Catherine, and a baby boy named Thomas. Young Henry, by then 14 and nearly as tall as his father, was already showing signs of becoming the kind of man who would restore the Sutherland name through character rather than wealth. Elizabeth was clever and kind, with her mother's dark hair and her father's grey eyes. And Rose, Duchess of Linfield, stood beside her husband watching their children dance at their first ball, and felt a contentment that had nothing to do with social standing and everything to do with love, freely given and gratefully received. "Do you remember?" Henry murmured, his hand finding hers. "When you tried to resign? When you believed leaving was the only option?" "I remember," Rose replied. "I was convinced that loving you was the most foolish thing I could possibly do." "Was it?" She looked at him. This man who had chosen his children over wealth, honor over expedience, love over every practical consideration. She thought of the life they had built together, imperfect and sometimes difficult, but rich with meaning. "It was the wisest choice I ever made," Rose said. "The only choice, really, because some things are worth any cost, any scandal, any sacrifice." "Such as?" "Love," Rose replied simply. "Truth, courage, the things that actually matter when everything else is stripped away." Henry raised her hand to his lips, his eyes warm with the affection that had only deepened over a decade of marriage. "I am grateful," he said quietly, "that you were brave enough to write that letter, brave enough to challenge me, brave enough to love me when I had little to offer but a tarnished name and an uncertain future." "I am grateful," Rose countered, "that you were brave enough to listen, to see, to choose what was right over what was easy." They stood together watching their children laugh and dance, and knew that they had won something far more valuable than social approval or financial security. They had won truth, they had won love, they had won each other, and in the end that was worth everything they had risked to claim it. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this journey. If this story of courage, truth and love against impossible odds touched your heart, please like, subscribe and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories that celebrate the triumph of love over convention, of truth over convenience, and of families built on courage rather than fortune. Together, we keep these stories of hope and redemption alive.